Hello, and welcome to today's webinar on SERDP funding opportunities. My name is Deanne Ryder, and I will be moderating today's session. We will get started in a few moments. While we wait for others to log on, I would like to cover a few logistical items. Today's broadcast will be listen only. We will have a question and answer period at the end of the presentation. You may submit questions by using the chat box in the lower left-hand portion of the screen. You need not wait on the Q&A period to submit your questions. In fact, we encourage you to submit them in advance of that session. The phone lines will remain listen only throughout the presentation, so we will not be taking any questions verbally. We will not be able to answer questions about specific proposal ideas or technologies during this webinar. If you run into any technical difficulties involving the presentation or call-in line, please contact the Ready technical support line as noted in the meeting confirmation email. Please note that both the audio and the presentation of today's session will be archived on our solicitation webpage in case you would like to refer to them in the future. Today's speakers are Dr. Ann Andrews, the Executive Director of SERDP and ESTCP, and Dr. Andrea Leeson, the SERDP and ESTCP Program Manager for Environmental Restoration and the Deputy Director. Before I turn it over to Ann and Andrea, I remind the phone participants that this is a listen-only session, and to submit questions, please use the chat box in the lower left-hand corner of the screen. Ann?
Thank you, Deanne. We will move right into discussing the SERDP funding opportunities for FY16. Before we talk specifically about SERDP, I was just going to cover that we run two programs out of this office. SERDP is the Strategic Environmental Research and Development Program, and ESTCP is the Environmental Security Technology Certification Program. SERDP funds science and technology, that is basic and applied research and advanced technology development, and ESTCP funds demonstrations and validations of environmental technologies. Today's topic will be the SERDP Solicitation. A little bit of history on SERDP. SERDP was established by Congress in 1991. It's officially a partnership between the Department of Defense, the Department of Energy, and the EPA, all of whom take an active role in its planning, project selection, and leadership. And SERDP is a requirements-driven program that identifies high-priority environmental science and technology investments that are required to address DoD's most pressing environmental problems. This next chart is just a schematic that shows the two separate programs. ESTCP and SERDP are two separate programs. Successful SERDP projects can propose to ESTCP, but they are not guaranteed to move on to ESTCP. And many ESTCP projects come from outside of SERDP. We think of the two programs together as addressing environmental requirements in two broad buckets. The first is the reduction of current and future liability. And by that we mean reducing the liability from contamination due to past practices, such as contaminated groundwater, soils, sediments, unexploded ordnance, and emerging contaminants. In this vein, we also invest in trying to reduce future liability through pollution prevention to control life cycle costs. The second large area that we invest in has to do with the sustainability of our ranges, facilities, and operations. This encompasses a wide variety of topics, including threatened and endangered species, marine mammals, unexploded ordnance and munitions constituents on our ranges, air, dust, noise, and sustainability of our forward operating bases. Within those two broad areas, we manage the program in four technical disciplines: weapon systems and platforms, environmental restoration, munitions response, and resource conservation and climate change. Now I'll talk a little bit about the specifics of the SERDP solicitations that we recently released. In SERDP, we released two different types of solicitations. The first is what we call core solicitations, and they have what we call core statements of need. And for these, we expect multiple awards per statement of need. Generally, they're proposed as multi-year proposals, but sometimes if someone needs to develop some data in order to really frame a multi-year proposal properly, we will look at limited scope proposals that are smaller in scale, $150,000, and about a year in duration. The solicitation is available through a broad agency announcement to universities, industry, and non-governmental organizations, and through a federal call for proposals to DoD and other federal agencies. In addition to the core statements of need, we also have what we call the SEED program for SERDP exploratory development. The core and the SEED have separate statements of need, and in the case of the SEED, here we look for only high-risk, high-payoff type of work at $150,000 or less and approximately 1 year in duration. And similar to the core, we put this out as both a broad agency announcement and a federal call so anybody can respond to these statements of need. The next chart shows the process that we solicit for core proposals. It's rather extensive, so I'll walk through it. As I said, we initiate this by putting out a broad agency announcement and a federal call for proposals, which went out last week. Pre-proposals are submitted to the SERDP office in early January, and we spend the month of January doing a staff review of those proposals, along with having some technical experts from outside help us review the proposals. In early February, we put out a request for full proposals to those pre-proposal submitters that we would like to request to submit a full proposal. Those full proposals, once they're submitted to us, all go out for an external peer review. And after the peer review, the proposals that come back with the highest technical merit then go on to our technical committees for review by a panel from the services, the DOE, the EPA representatives. That committee makes recommendations for selections to SERDP. And finally, all the proposals that are recommended for funding are required to go before our scientific advisory board for final approval. That takes place in the September and October timeframe. The next chart gives a list of the core solicitation dates. I won't walk through them all. You can certainly read them yourself. The most important one to be aware of at this point is the January 8th submission of pre-proposals. And just to remind you that in order to be eligible for SERDP funding, you must submit a pre-proposal. We don't accept full proposals outside of this process. The next chart walks through the funding process for the SEED solicitation. It's a little bit different. It is much more compressed. Again, we go out with the broad agency announcement and the federal call for proposals. There is no pre-proposal step in the SEED solicitation process. We request full proposals to be submitted in the March timeframe. They're reviewed by staff and then by the ESTC, or by the SERDP Technical Committee, and then the Technical Committee makes recommendations to SERDP for selection. SEED proposals are not required to go before the Scientific Advisory Board, but they are eligible for follow-on funding if successful. In that event, we will request a full proposal, which would again go out for peer review, very similar to the core solicitation process, and would end with a recommendation by the Technical Committee and finally review by the Scientific Advisory Board. The next chart just gives the SEED solicitation dates. The proposals are due on March 10th. Finally, we have a few statistics from the FY15 solicitation. As you can see, it's a very competitive program. We received 408 pre-proposals to the core solicitation, of which we ultimately requested full proposals from 106 submitters. And the overall success rate was about 30% if you were requested to submit a full proposal, but all the way from the pre-proposal stage through the end, success rates were somewhat lower. I'm now going to turn this over to Andrea, and she's going to talk about some of the statements of need. So Andrea?
Thank you, Ann. Statements of need were released in each of the 4 program areas under SERDP. Each statement of need is structured to first cover the SON objectives, followed by background information that describes the issues that we need to address. Finally, the contact information for the responsible program manager is listed at the end of the SON. If you have specific questions concerning an SON, please contact the program manager directly. Please also note it's very important to read the SONs carefully and make sure that your proposal addresses the objectives listed. As we'll discuss later, our first criterion for evaluating proposals is whether the proposed effort addresses the SON objective. Under environmental restoration, we released 3 statements of need. The first SON is titled Measurement and Enhancement of Abiotic Attenuation Processes in Groundwater. Our goal with this SON is to address those contaminant attenuation processes that have been a little less studied, and that is the abiotic processes. Given the number of sites that will eventually progress into a natural attenuation, fully understanding the different processes that impact contaminant fate and transport will help us to better understand and manage our sites. In this SON, we're soliciting for research that will either develop better methodologies for the measurement of key abiotic processes or that will develop techniques for enhancing these abiotic processes. 3 sub-objectives are listed for this SON, and proposals can address one or more of the objectives. It isn't necessary to address all 3. Contaminants of interest are the chlorinated solvents such as PCE and TCE, as well as their daughter products, and we're also interested in some of the energetic compounds such as RDX. All proposals must demonstrate how the knowledge developed will ultimately be used to better quantify the impact of abiotic processes on contaminant attenuation and the potential for enhancing attenuation during practical in situ applications. The next SON released under environmental restoration is titled Ecotoxicity of Perfluorinated Compounds. This SON is focused on addressing some data gaps in our understanding of the ecotoxicity of the perfluorinated compounds that were typically used in firefighting foams. Proposals are sought to develop toxicity reference values for birds, reptiles, and amphibians for PFOS and PFOA, and to determine the relative toxicity of other perfluoroalkyl substances compared to PFOA and PFOS, so that we can better improve our risk management decisions and address risk communication concerns. The last SON released under environmental restoration is improved understanding of particle deposition from low-order detonations of high-explosive munitions. The goal of this SON is to improve our understanding of particle size, areal distribution, and type and quantity of explosive residue from a variety of classes of munitions so that we can improve our estimation and modeling of potential sources of chemicals of concern, as well as the pathways to receptors on DoD testing and training ranges. Substantial previous work has been done by SERDP in this area, and we encourage you to familiarize yourself with the previous efforts. These are listed in the background section, and there is a link to our website where you can find descriptions and reports for all these previous efforts. In addition, it's very important that proposers are clear as to how they will simulate a low-order detonation, and you also must be clear on your ability to work in compliance with ordnance and munition constituent safety and legal restrictions. Please note that on the website, this SON is shown as being updated shortly after the solicitation release. The update was only a correction to a reference. No other content was modified. 2 statements of need were released under the Resource Conservation and Climate Change SON. The first is titled Changes in Disease Pathogen Exposure Pathways Under Non-Stationary Conditions and Their Implications for Wildlife and Human Exposure on DoD Lands. The goal of this statement of need is to improve our understanding of how to manage pathogens and their vectors in the future in the event of non-stationary conditions. 3 research needs are listed, and all proposals must address both the SON objective and all 3 research needs. Please make sure you're very explicit as to how the proposed research addresses the objective and the research needs. The second Resource Conservation and Climate Change SON is titled Improved Understanding of Wildland Fire Combustion Processes for Department of Defense Managed Ecosystems. The goal of this SON is to develop our knowledge that improves our understanding of the processes involved in fine fuel heat exchange, ignition, and fire spread, and how that may be affected by fuel condition, that we can then incorporate this into fire behavior models that can be used to predict ecological effects and emissions responses. There are 4 research needs listed for this statement of need. Proposals must address this SON objective, the main one, and then 1 or more of the research needs. It's not necessary to address all research needs for this SON. As mentioned previously, please be very careful to be explicit as to how your proposed research addresses the SON objective and the research needs selected for study. At this point, I'll turn it back to Anne for the next SONs.
Now we will turn to the SONs in the Munitions Response Program area. There are two. One is a core solicitation SON. That's titled Detection, Classification, and Remediation of Military Munitions in the Underwater Environment. Here we're looking at technologies to detect, classify, and remediate military munitions. Capabilities are needed for a wide variety of aquatic environments, including ponds, lakes, rivers, estuaries, and coastal and open ocean areas. Although no single technology needs to be applicable to all of the different environments that are possible. Munitions of interest range from small projectiles and mortars to large bombs. Characteristics such as sediment type, seafloor morphology, hydrodynamic conditions, and water column turbidity and visibility may impact the detection and characterization of munitions in the underwater environment. And finally, we're interested in assessing the relative abundance of intact munitions, munitions-related debris, and other sources of clutter at multiple sites to better understand the detection and classification capabilities of sensors in a wide variety of situations. The second statement of need of munitions response is in the SEED solicitation, and it involves modeling predictions of munitions penetration in a variety of soils. When munitions are detected in the terrestrial environment, we use sensors, typically magnetometers and electromagnetic induction devices, and we have a very good understanding of the sensors and their detection capability with respect to depth. But what is less well understood is how deeply the munitions may be found at a variety of relevant environmental site conditions. So the intent of this statement of need is to develop models to predict the penetration depth of common military munitions in various soil conditions to support planning for munitions response actions and risk management decisions following their completion. The ultimate goal of this statement of need, although we don't expect that a SEED project will get to this endpoint, is to develop a simple parameterized model that takes as input initial conditions and predicts the likely and maximum depth of penetration in a range of realistic conditions. Finally, we'll turn to the statements of need in the Weapon Systems and Platforms Program area. There are 6 of these. The first are associated with the core solicitation, and the last 2 are associated with the SEED solicitation. The first one is to collect data to improve the understanding of the source and mechanism of full-scale military tactical aircraft engine noise. And here what we're looking to do is generate a database of correlated exhaust flow and noise measurements from high-performance gas turbine engines. We're looking for measurements throughout the jet plume acquired with sufficient resolution to allow for the correlation of full-scale engine features with numerical models and laboratory-scale measurements. We're looking for highly detailed near-field measurements. And finally, the measurements must be made in such a way that the flow data and the acoustic data can be correlated if they are not collected simultaneously. The second weapon system platform statement of need is related to reducing or eliminating hazardous air pollutants and volatile organics from aerospace polyurethane rain erosion coatings. Here we're looking to develop rapid curing coatings that are free of isocyanates and have low or no VOC and HAPS emissions. These coatings must still meet critical performance needs, which are articulated in the SON. The benefits of this to the DoD are to reduce or eliminate tens of thousands of pounds of emissions and to address occupational safety and health issues. Next, we have the environmentally sustainable manufacturing for energetic formulations. And here we're really looking to develop and mature novel technologies to reduce the environmental, safety, and occupational health impacts of the manufacture and load and pack of energetic formulations. We list a number of requirements. I don't think I need to read them to you. But the last one is particularly of note, that we want to make sure that these projects at least begin an evaluation of the potential environmental properties and toxicity of alternative processes that are proposed. Also in the core statements of need, we have the alternatives for chromium and nickel plating in repair operations. Here we're looking to develop processes that can be performed on localized areas to replace electrolytic chromium and nickel plating. We're looking for high deposition rates, for coatings that are suitable for a breadth of common military parts and substrates, that can operate in versatile environments, and that are suitable for spot repairs. The two SEED statements of need. The first one is the development of methodologies for evaluating emissions from metal-based, energetic, and pyrotechnic formulations. Here we're looking to develop laboratory-scale emissions characterization methodologies for energetic formulations, particularly to characterize the products of combustion, including metals, gases, and soot, as well as the particle size distribution at several time scales across the combustion event. We're looking for validation with common energetic formulations with a focus on metal-based energetics and pyrotechnics. And finally, to simulate real-world conditions for explosive formulations at the multi-gram laboratory scale, which could be adapted for outdoor long-range exposure at a firing range. And the last statement of need in weapon systems and platforms relates to environmentally sound and safe munitions demilitarization. Here we're looking for approaches and technologies to reduce, reuse, and otherwise demilitarize excess munitions. The technology should maximize recycling and reuse, minimize operator exposure, and most of all, reduce life cycle costs. We're looking for alternatives to open burn and open detonation, and for approaches or technologies that have potential dual-use applicability to treat the waste of commercial pyrotechnics and waste fireworks. Proposals for the demilitarization of chemical weapons or chemical warfare material are not of interest and will not be considered responsive under this statement of need. Finally, we'll turn to some more programmatic information about the proposal selection criteria. The next chart has the selection criteria for the core statement of need. And as Andrea alluded to earlier, the first thing we do is a relevance check. And this is a pass-fail criteria. Proposals that don't pass this relevance check are not evaluated further. And what we look for here is, does the proposal address the statement of need objective? And is it within the purview of SERDP? That is it basic research, applied research, or advanced technology development? Proposals that pass that gate are then evaluated for technical merit, personnel, and cost at the pre-proposal stage. Should we request a full proposal, additional criteria for evaluation of that full proposal include a transition plan and small business participation. The SEED selection criteria are on the following chart. We again do the same relevancy check, and that is a pass-fail gate. Then proposals are evaluated on technical merit and transition potential. And it's worth discussing just a moment what we mean by transition potential with regard to a SEED. And this is really for both SEEDs and limited scope proposals, that it's really key to articulate the specific questions to be answered or data to be gathered that will allow you to frame follow-on work that is envisioned. In other words, why will this project let me make a better decision a year from now after we've accomplished the objectives of the SEED proposal? We'll close with a few remarks about the hallmarks of a competitive proposal. First, it must clearly address the statement of need. It needs to demonstrate an understanding of the state of the science. We're looking for hypothesis-driven work, and the evaluation is really focused on the technical approach. We're looking for a detailed approach and a clear explanation of your experimental design with a very clear tie to the end state that you envision getting to at the end of the project. With that, the last chart just lists the SERDP and ESTCP website where all of the information about the statements of need and the process can be found. And I would refer you to go and look there. And now I think I'll turn it back to Deanne.
Great, thank you, Ann. We've had a number of questions, and I wanted to Attendees know that we will answer as many questions as time permits, focusing on those that are generally applicable to all submitters or logistical in nature. Please note that we will not be able to answer questions about specific proposal ideas or technologies during this webinar. If you have a technical question, please contact the program manager listed on the appropriate statement of need. Does Department of Energy ever provide input to the environmental drivers?
We do get input from the Department of Energy. Each focus area or program area within SERDP receives advice from a technical review committee, and that committee is made up of members from each of the services as well as DOE and the EPA. And it's through these committees that we do receive input on environmental drivers.
Are there topic authors or topic leads that we can ask questions for a specific topic?
Yes, there are. There is a point of contact listed with each statement of need. It's the program manager who manages that portfolio. You can ask them general questions if you need a clarification about a statement of need. We can't entertain questions about specific proposal ideas or what are we looking for, that sort of thing.
Do limited scope core proposals go through the same pre-proposal process as full proposals?
Yes, if you submit a limited scope proposal towards a core statement of need, you must go through the same pre-proposal process that we require for a full proposal.
Have target funding levels been assigned for each core SON?
No, we don't assign target funding levels in advance. What I can say is that typical SERDP projects run from about $200,000 to $600,000 per year and tend to run 3 to 5 years in duration. There's a lot of variability around that, though. We will do one-year projects that are limited scope in nature, and we occasionally have very large projects that can run $1 million a year. And what you should do is propose the budget that is appropriate to the work that needs to be done in your proposal, and it should be very clear that that budget is an appropriate level of effort to accomplish the work that's proposed.
Are there any concerns including federal partners on non-federal proposals?
There are not. We actually encourage partnering on our proposals. If a proposal is submitted through the BAA with a non-federal lead, they can have partners from the federal sector. We just would send funding directly to that federal partner and funding directly to the private entity. The funds would not be mixed.
Are the SONs in climate change and resource conservation core or limited scope or seed proposals?
Those are both core statements of need, and so in response to them, we would take proposals that are multi-year in nature, or we would take proposals that are limited scope.
In the presentation, you mentioned about improving efficiency in forward operating bases. Is this part of the solicitation, or is it part of ESTCP?
It is currently not part of this solicitation. We currently have projects under both SERDP and ESTCP addressing some issues associated with forward operating bases, but we do not now have an open solicitation for that topic.
If you submit a seed application for a core solicitation, does that require a pre-proposal?
So I just want to make sure that this is quite clear. You can't submit a seed application in response to a core solicitation. So in the SEED program is a standalone program. You submit a full proposal in March. However, it can be a little confusing with what we call the limited scope proposals. If you want to submit a limited scope proposal in response to a core statement of need, then you need to submit a pre-proposal, and that will go through the entire core process.
Can we submit either a core or limited scope to every SON?
Yes, that is open to every SON that's released.
Do you give critical feedback to proposals?
No, we don't. And the reason is simply a matter of lack of resources to be able to do that.
Could you provide some guidance on the appropriate funding amount that can be requested for core pre-proposals?
We don't really have a specific funding amount that we request. We always tell people to please request the amount that you believe is needed to accomplish the objectives that you're proposing. Having said that, most projects come in roughly anywhere from a limited scope, which is $150,000 up to, and that's $150,000 total, up to perhaps $300,000 or $400,000 per year with a 3 or 4 year project. That varies by program area, it varies by topic, but we don't really have a defined funding amount that we would recommend.
Would proposals submitted by small businesses be more competitive if there's a university partner?
Not necessarily. We look very carefully at the team that you assemble, and we expect that all of the relevant expertise would be present, but we don't have a particular preference for university proposals over small business proposals over federal laboratory proposals, as long as the necessary expertise is there.
Are proposals that include students encouraged?
Definitely encourage is not a requirement, but we certainly do like to fund students, and we encourage that as a really ultimately investing in the future.
Are there any site requirements for the climate change and fire studies?
It's not a strict requirement, but we have a strong preference for work that is done on DoD installations. If there is a good reason to do work, or perhaps there's a related project that's on a non-DoD site, then we would certainly entertain that. But in terms of showing the relevance to DoD, we generally think you should be able to find a DoD installation in order to do the project.
For the pathogen SON, could you clarify what is meant by vector? It seems that this SON includes direct transmission, but then the third mandatory aim is about vector control.
The goal of this SON was to address both types of transmission, either direct transmission or through a vector, so both are applicable.
Following on to an earlier question, do proposals need to be conducted on a DoD site, or are laboratory-based research also accepted?
There is no need for proposals in the majority of SONs to have a field component. So laboratory-based research, if it's responsive to the statements of need and if it's responsive to the articulated objectives and research needs, are perfectly acceptable. But just to reiterate, if you have a field component, you generally should be able to find a DoD site to do it on.
What level of detail in terms of budget requirements are provided for the pre-proposal submission?
We actually require very little detail for the budget in the pre-proposal. What we ask for is essentially just total funding required per year and then total for the whole project. So it's really a very limited amount at this stage.
Are any projects set aside for small or disadvantaged business?
No, we don't have a set-aside program, but small business participation is a factor in the evaluation of the full proposal.
Can state agencies collaborate on university-led BAA proposals?
As I mentioned earlier, we definitely encourage partnership. We have had state agencies participate on university-led proposals in the past.
Could you provide clarification as to what actually a DoD installation is?
By that we mean installation in the 50 United States or an enduring installation abroad that is not a forward operating base, that is not a place where deployed forces are stationed, but is a permanent fixed installation.
Is the number of team members a factor on the proposal scoring?
No, it really isn't. We have proposals that come in with only one person on the team with perhaps a student. We also have proposals come in with multiple technical leads. Either is fine. It really comes down to what is appropriate for what's being proposed.
Would a Navy-owned site be considered a DoD site?
Oh yes, absolutely. Any site owned by any of the services would be considered a DoD site. Any site where we have management responsibility is also considered a DoD site. So a formerly used defense site would qualify, or a site from base realignment and closure.
Are there limitations on the F&A from a university proposed budget?
I can't quote specifics on what's required in the budget in that sense. You are required to meet all federal regulations, and if your proposal is selected for funding, you would negotiate with a federal contracting agency on the final cost proposal.
Does project funding need to be equally distributed across the funding years, or is unequal funding allowed?
No, unequal funding is allowed. The funding profile should be what is required to do the work. So if you have a particularly heavy, installation of field work or something like that, that is going to consume a much larger portion of the budget in a particular year, then we would absolutely want to know that.
Are there restrictions in the number of months of a salary a co-PI can receive?
There are not. Again, you should propose what makes sense to meet the technical objectives.
Go ahead. Well, thank you. That was the last general question that we have received. There are other questions which are more SON or technology specific. Again, we ask that you contact the program manager for that specific area. Thank you for attending today's webinar. As a reminder, the presentation and audio will be archived for future reference on the SERDP Solicitation webpage. This concludes today's webcast.